In the sun-blasted wastes of ancient Mesopotamia, a tale of ambition and avarice reached its horrifying conclusion, forever etching a grotesque image into the annals of the Roman Empire. It is the story of Marcus Licinius Crassus, a man whose wealth was so immense it was said he could finance an entire army from his own coffers, the richest man in all of Rome. His fortune, however, was a monument built upon the ruin of others, a testament to a life spent in ruthless acquisition. He would come to learn a terrible lesson in that unforgiving desert, that insatiable greed, when pursued to the ends of the earth, often becomes its own grim executioner. This is the chronicle of how gold, the substance that defined his power and fueled his ambition, was transformed into the very instrument of his agonizing and infamous demise. The year was 53 BCE, and the Roman Republic was at the zenith of its power, yet teetering on the brink of internal collapse. An uneasy truce, a political pact known as the First Triumvirate, held the sprawling state together. Three titans of the age governed the known world: Pompey the Great, the celebrated general; Julius Caesar, the brilliant military strategist and conqueror of Gaul; and Marcus Licinius Crassus. While his counterparts were forging their names in the crucible of battle, earning triumphs and adulation, Crassus wrestled with a galling insecurity. He was perceived not as a peer, but as a financier among conquerors, a banker in a world of warriors. His path to power had been paved with sesterces, not swords. He had amassed his colossal fortune through cunning and often cruel real estate speculation, famously running a private fire brigade that would only fight a blaze after the desperate property owner agreed to sell the burning building for a pittance. He profited immensely from the proscriptions of the dictator Sulla, buying up the estates of condemned citizens. This wealth bought him immense political leverage, but it could not purchase the one thing he coveted above all else: military glory and the genuine respect of his countrymen. He had seen Caesar's dispatches from Gaul, thrilling the populace with tales of subjugated tribes and new territories. He had witnessed Pompey's triumphs for clearing the Mediterranean of pirates and his conquests in the east. Their victories were celebrated in stone and song, their names echoing through the marble halls of the Senate. Meanwhile, Crassus's own military record was a source of private shame. His one notable achievement, the suppression of Spartacus's slave revolt, was tainted by its brutal nature and seen as a policing action rather than a glorious foreign war. The constant, stinging accusation of being the third wheel of the triumvirate was a private torment, a relentless whisper that his legacy was one of currency, not conquest. At 60 years of age, an age when most Roman aristocrats would be content to retire to their lavish villas and enjoy the fruits of their labors, Crassus was consumed by a restless ambition. He saw only one path to immortal glory, one final chance to etch his name alongside Caesar and Pompey in the pantheon of Roman heroes, a grand military campaign that would rival their greatest achievements. His gaze turned eastward, to the vast and enigmatic Parthian Empire. Like a siren's call, Parthia beckoned, a shimmering golden prize lying beyond Rome's eastern frontier. This sprawling kingdom, stretching from the Euphrates River to the Indus Valley, was the gatekeeper of the fabled silk and spice routes, the arteries of commerce that connected the Orient with the Occident. The wealth that flowed through its territory was the stuff of legend. Crassus, a man who understood value better than anyone, convinced himself that the conquest of Parthia would deliver a dual prize: the military renown he desperately craved and a plunder of gold and silver so vast it would make his own legendary fortune appear trivial. His obsession, however, was not shared by all. The Senate was wary of his motives, viewing the planned invasion as a vainglorious adventure rather than a strategic necessity. They refused to sanction the expedition with a formal declaration of war, a significant political rebuke. But Crassus, buoyed by his wealth and his triumvirate authority, would not be deterred. Ignoring the ill omens reported by the augurs and the palpable disapproval of his peers, he pressed ahead with his plans. In 55 BCE, he used his political clout to secure the governorship of Syria, a position he intended to use as a staging ground for his invasion. Upon arrival, he immediately began preparations, acting more like a king than a governor. He dismissed the council of his seasoned local commanders, men who had spent years on the frontier and understood the unique challenges of desert warfare and the formidable nature of the Parthian military. Their cautious warnings about Parthian tactics were brushed aside as the timid excuses of lesser men. In Crassus's mind, the outcome was preordained. The desert kingdoms had always yielded to the superior discipline, engineering, and sheer might of the Roman legions. Why should Parthia prove any different? His arrogance was fueled by intelligence reports that suggested the Parthian court was mired in dynastic squabbles, making the empire appear ripe for a swift, decisive blow. Believing his enemy to be weak and divided, Crassus assembled a truly massive invasion force. 7 legions, comprising nearly 40,000 of Rome's finest heavy infantry, formed the core of his army. They were supported by 4,000 cavalry and a similar number of light infantry skirmishers. It was one of the largest and most powerful expeditionary forces Rome had ever sent to the east, a magnificent instrument of conquest. Serving among his officers was his son, Publius, a brave and decorated cavalry commander who had honed his skills under the legendary Julius Caesar himself in Gaul. The presence of his beloved heir added a dynastic dimension to the campaign. This was to be the foundation of a new military legacy for the Carrhae, a glory to be passed from father to son. As the spring of 53 BCE arrived, the great army, gleaming in the Syrian sun, crossed the Euphrates River at Zeugma and marched into destiny. The initial stages of the invasion seemed to affirm Crassus's every assumption. The towns and settlements of Mesopotamia either surrendered meekly or were swiftly overcome by Roman siegecraft, their walls no match for Roman engineering. The flat, open terrain appeared perfect for the legion's orderly formations, and early reports confirmed that the Parthian king, Oroda II, was preoccupied with an internal rebellion, leaving the frontier defenses seemingly thin. Crassus saw victory within his grasp, unaware that every easy step forward was leading him deeper into a meticulously prepared trap. Crassus's early, easy victories were not signs of Parthian weakness, but the calculated moves of a masterful and patient predator. The Parthian forces were under the command of a brilliant young general known as Surena. He was not retreating in disarray, he was deliberately drawing the overconfident Roman army deeper and deeper into the arid heartland of Mesopotamia, stretching their supply lines to the breaking point and luring them away from the life-giving rivers into a terrain that was his greatest ally. The minor skirmishes the Romans won with ease were nothing more than strategic withdrawals, feints designed to inflate Crassus's ego and exhaust his legions through grueling forced marches under a merciless sun. With every mile the Romans advanced, the trap was closing. As they pushed further into the desolate landscape, the true nature of the Parthian military machine began to unveil itself. The Romans had been fed propaganda that depicted their enemies as disorganized barbarians, but the reality was terrifyingly different. The Parthians were a highly sophisticated military power, heirs to centuries of experience in fighting and thriving in the harsh conditions of their homeland. Their army was a revolutionary concept for the Romans, built entirely around mobility and ranged devastation. It consisted of 2 primary components, the elite heavy cavalry known as cataphracts, who were armored from head to toe in gleaming mail or scale armor, serving as a powerful shock force, and a vast, swarming host of light horse archers, masters of the composite bow who could unleash storms of arrows from incredible distances, striking and fading before any retaliation was possible. Surena's strategy was a masterclass in exploiting every single weakness of traditional Roman military doctrine. The Romans relied on their heavy infantry, fighting in tight, disciplined formations, and their unparalleled engineering skills to win set-piece battles. The Parthians, in contrast, prized speed, flexibility, and harassment. Where the Romans sought a single, decisive clash with clear front lines, the Parthians preferred a war of attrition, refusing to engage in a direct, pitched battle while they slowly bled their opponents dry through constant, stinging attacks. The psychological toll was just as devastating as the physical one. Parthian scouts would materialize on distant sand dunes, just visible enough to keep the Roman sentries on high alert, only to vanish like mirages before a patrol could be sent to engage them. Foraging parties and supply convoys were ambushed by these phantom enemies, who would strike without warning and then melt back into the endless expanse of the desert. sleep became a forgotten luxury for the Roman soldiers. The nights were filled with strange noises and fleeting movements on the camp's periphery, leaving the entire army perpetually on edge, exhausted, and paranoid before they had even faced the main Parthian force. Crassus, the arrogant commander, began to feel the cold grip of doubt. He started to realize that the Roman way of war, invincible in the forests of Gaul or on the plains of Italy, was proving perilously inadequate in this new environment. His legionaries, encased in heavy armor and burdened with equipment, struggled terribly with the suffocating heat and the alien terrain. His cavalry contingent, which he had considered more than sufficient, was hopelessly outnumbered and outmaneuvered by the nimble Parthians. Most alarmingly, his supply lines, the very lifeline of his army, were becoming dangerously exposed to Parthian raids that seemed to materialize from everywhere and nowhere at once. The decisive moment, the point of no return, came near a small Mesopotamian town called Carrhae. Here, Crassus resolved to make his stand. The local geography offered some comfort. Nearby hills seemed to provide a defensible anchor for his infantry, and a local stream promised a solution to his dwindling water supplies. More importantly, intelligence reports, likely fed to him by Surina, suggested that the main Parthian army was finally approaching. This was it, the glorious, decisive battle Crassus believed would validate his entire campaign and prove Roman military supremacy once and for all. The Battle of Carrhae commenced at dawn on June 9, 53 BCE. The Roman army was a magnificent sight, arranged in a massive, hollow square, a defensive formation designed to repel attacks from all sides. The heavy infantry formed the impenetrable walls of the square, with cavalry on the wings and light troops screening the formation. With their polished armor gleaming and their iconic eagle standards held high, they were the very embodiment of the finest military machine the world had ever known. Crassus took his position with the center, while his son Publius proudly commanded the cavalry on one flank. Then, Surina's army appeared, and the Roman confidence began to curdle into disbelief. Instead of a recognizable army with a center, flanks, and reserves, the Romans were confronted by something utterly alien, a fluid, shimmering sea of pure cavalry that moved across the desert floor like a single, living organism. The Parthian cataphracts formed a glittering, ironclad core, while thousands upon thousands of horse archers flowed around them like a river, creating a constantly shifting, unpredictable tactical problem that Roman command and control could not begin to counter. The battle opened not with a clash of steel, but with a sound the Romans would never forget, the thunderous beat of massive Parthian kettle drums, a terrifying, rhythmic pulse designed to unnerve them. Then came the arrows. A barrage so thick it darkened the sky, raining down upon the static Roman formation. Roman legionaries locked their large shields, the scuta, overhead to form the testudo or tortoise formation, a tactic effective against a brief volley. But this was no brief volley. The Romans expected their enemies to exhaust their ammunition and be forced to engage in close combat. They were wrong. In a stroke of logistical genius, Surina had organized camel trains laden with nothing but arrows, which constantly resupplied his archers. The storm of missiles was endless. Hour after grueling hour, the arrows rained down, punching through shields, armor, and flesh, gradually eroding Roman discipline, morale, and manpower under the relentless, unopposed bombardment. Seeing the legions being whittled away and desperate to take initiative, the young and impetuous Publius Crassus made a fateful decision. Believing he saw an opening, he broke formation and led his entire cavalry wing of 1,300 horsemen, including 1,000 Gallic warriors fiercely loyal to him, in a valiant charge against the Parthian horse archers. It was exactly the move Surina had been waiting for. This played directly into his trap. The horse archers feigned a retreat, luring Publius's force further and further away from the main Roman army. Once the trap was sprung, the Parthian heavy cataphracts, who had been held in reserve, slammed into the front of the Roman charge, their immense weight and long lances shattering the Gallic lines. Simultaneously, the horse archers who had baited him wheeled around, completely encircling the now exposed cavalry force. Cut off from his father's army, surrounded by an overwhelming enemy that struck from all directions, Publius and his men were caught in a kill zone. They fought with incredible bravery, but their fate was sealed. From the main Roman square, Crassus and his legionaries could only watch in horror as their comrades were systematically butchered, their desperate counterattack transformed into a slaughter. The death of Publius was the psychological blow from which the Roman army would not recover. The battle's turning point came not as a strategic maneuver, but as a moment of pure psychological horror. With chilling theatricality, Surina's men severed the young commander's head, mounted it upon the tip of a spear, and paraded it triumphantly before the Roman lines. Crassus, who had been anxiously watching the distant melee, hoping for his son's victorious return, was forced to watch his heir's severed head bobbing above the enemy ranks. The sight shattered him. Whatever composure and authority he had left evaporated in an instant. The confident, ambitious general who had crossed the Euphrates just months before was gone, replaced by a broken, hollow-eyed old man, paralyzed by grief and incapable of issuing a coherent command. With their commander effectively catatonic, Roman discipline, the very bedrock of their military might, began to crumble. The horrifying reality of their situation descended upon the legionaries. They were trapped deep in hostile territory, hundreds of miles from safety, surrounded by a superior enemy who could strike with impunity while remaining untouchable. Their water supplies were nearly gone, the heat was unbearable, and the number of dead and wounded was piling up at a terrifying rate. Every desperate attempt to break out of the encirclement or push forward only resulted in more devastating casualties from the never-ending Parthian arrow fire. The vast desert that had once seemed like a golden highway to conquest had transformed into a suffocating, inescapable prison. As night mercifully fell, casting a shroud over the carnage, Crassus's subordinate officers managed to organize a retreat toward the dubious safety of Carrhae, hoping the city's walls could neutralize the Parthian cavalry advantage. But the withdrawal quickly degenerated into a chaotic rout. Discipline vanished as exhausted, panicked soldiers abandoned their heavy equipment, their wounded comrades, and all semblance of formation in a desperate scramble for their own lives. Thousands were mercilessly cut down by the pursuing Parthians during the terrifying night march, while countless others simply collapsed from heatstroke and exhaustion, left behind to die in the sand by comrades who could barely save themselves. By the time the tattered remnants of Rome's great eastern army staggered into Carrhae at dawn, they were a shadow of their former selves. They had lost nearly half their strength in a single day. The proud legions were reduced to a desperate, defeated mob, their standards lost, their confidence annihilated, and their commander utterly broken by grief and the sheer scale of his hubris. Crassus had gotten the decisive battle he craved, but the decision had been a catastrophic verdict against him. Rather than launching a final, bloody assault on the demoralized survivors in the city, Surina once again demonstrated his mastery of psychological warfare. He offered a truce. Envoys were sent to the Romans proposing a parley between the commanders to negotiate terms for a peaceful withdrawal of Crassus's remaining forces. To the desperate Romans, the offer seemed a potential lifeline. For Crassus, it was a straw to clutch at, a chance, however slim, to salvage something from the wreckage of his ambition and save his remaining men. Despite the urgent warnings of his officers, who rightly suspected treachery, Crassus agreed to the meeting. His judgment was clouded by desperation. He needed to believe that an honorable escape from this nightmare was still possible, that his grand gamble had not resulted in total ruin for himself and for Rome. The meeting took place on neutral ground between the two armies. What happened next is debated by historians, but whether it was premeditated treachery or a violent misunderstanding born of mutual suspicion, the result was the same. A scuffle broke out, and the Parthian soldiers quickly overpowered the Roman delegation. In an instant, Marcus Licinius Crassus, the richest man in Rome, the conqueror-in-waiting, the member of the Triumvirate, was a captive, a prisoner of the man who had destroyed his army and killed his son. He was now completely at the mercy of an enemy who had every reason to despise him and everything he represented. Surina's treatment of his high-value prisoner was not to be a simple, swift execution. Crassus's death was to be a performance, a carefully crafted message. He embodied everything the Parthians scorned about Roman imperialism. His invasion was unprovoked, a war of pure aggression motivated by personal greed and a lust for glory. Therefore, his punishment had to fit his crime in a way that would resonate throughout the ancient world. The method chosen was both ingenious and deeply, darkly symbolic. Molten gold, the very substance that had defined Crassus's life, fueled his ambition, and financed his disastrous campaign, would now be the instrument of his death. The man who had thirsted for gold his entire life would finally have his fill. The execution was a grim spectacle, staged before an audience of Parthian nobles and captured Roman soldiers, forced to watch the final humiliation of their commander. Crassus was forced to his knees. Soldiers held his head fast and pried his mouth open, silencing any final pleas or curses. Then, from a crucible, the shimmering, liquid gold was poured slowly down his throat. The physical agony would have been beyond human comprehension, a searing heat exceeding 1,000 degrees Celsius incinerating his mouth, throat, and internal organs. But the symbolic agony was the true purpose of the display. The man who valued gold above human life was now having his body filled with it, his worship of wealth made literal in his damnation. The mouth that had delivered speeches of conquest was now choked with the very metal he pursued across a continent. His body, which had enjoyed every imaginable luxury, was now a vessel for a grotesque lesson on the consequences of unchecked greed. The aftermath of Crassus's death sent shockwaves that destabilized the Roman world. The news of the defeat and the humiliating execution shattered the myth of Roman invincibility. Politically, the consequences were cataclysmic. Crassus, for all his flaws, had been the financial and political ballast balancing the colossal egos of Pompey and Caesar. With him gone, the triumvirate fractured, leaving the two remaining strongmen on an inevitable collision course that would plunge the Republic into a bloody civil war and ultimately lead to its demise. In death, Crassus had ironically hastened the very chaos he sought to transcend with his eastern conquest. His head was reportedly sent to the Parthian court, where it was gruesomely used as a prop in a performance of Euripides' Greek tragedy The Bacchae, a play about a king destroyed by his own hubris. This final act turned Roman defeat into lasting entertainment for their enemies. The story of Marcus Crassus endures as a timeless and brutal warning. His journey from a titan of finance to a casualty of his own ambition illustrates how personal greed can alter the course of history. The molten gold that silenced him remains the ultimate symbol of how the things we desire most intensely can, in the end, become the very instruments of our ruin.